Hi, I'm going to be showing you how to fit an arrow rest to your bow, your compound bow, compound arrow rest. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fit the launcher blade to the arrow rest arm. Obviously this is a blade style rest. It's one of the more common kinds of arrow rest you'll find out there for compound bows at the moment. There are other styles, you get dropaways, and there are different styles of launcher you can have. The blade rest is the most popular just because it is so easy to tune. So a lot of people do prefer to use it. They are called blade rests because of the type of launcher that they use. Now the launcher is the bit the arrow sits on. So if I go across a neutral background here for you so you can see, these are the blades that fit on the launchers, thin with a pronged top to them. Now they come in different widths and different stiffnesses. So the width is the gap between the two prongs. So this is a narrow one. This is designed for outdoor arrows, so your skinny carbons, X10s, anything like that. This is actually a standard blade, so it will fit a lot of the carbon arrows. It can also fit some of the indoor arrows. A lot of people choose to use the standard fit blade for indoors as well, just to cut down on any potential contact between the arrow and the blade. They do come in a wide fitting as well. I don't actually own one of those, so I can't show you it. Now they come in different stiffnesses. Now they're measured in thousandths of an inch. So you'll see stamped on the blade. Different manufacturers have got different methods of denoting the stiffness of each blade. The most common one is you'll see a number on there, so it'll be 0.010, so that's a 10 blade. You'll get an 8 blade, so that's 0.0080. I think. I've not got one in front of me, so I can't be doubly sure. And you'll get a 12 blade as well. Now the 12 blade's the stiffest blade. It's designed to support a very heavy arrow, so more along the lines of your indoor arrows, your 2315s with a very heavy point weight. They do need a fair bit of support to stop them flexing that blade too much during the shot, so the blade is stiffer to support those. An 8 blade is very, very thin. It's designed for a very light arrow. You don't want the blade to be too stiff for the arrow you're shooting, as it tends to make it a lot harder to get a good tune out of the bow. So the 8 blade's for the very light arrows. A 10 blade, it's kind of the does everything blade. It will work quite well with a light arrow, or might work okay with a heavy arrow. I actually use a 10 blade indoors on my aluminiums, and I've never had a problem getting them to tune with the 10 blade. So it really is the does everything blade, and it's probably the one you're going to see on most people's bows. So for this I'm going to set it up for outdoors, so I'm going to use the narrow blade. So first thing to do is to attach the blade to the arrow rest arm. This is a 2-hole blade. Depending on the manufacturer, you may have a 1-hole blade, so you use 1 screw through the middle of the blade. This uses 2, so you're going to attach the blade with the screw. So using an Allen key, just tighten that in, so put that screw there. And then the second bolt. Right, so screws are in. Just nip them down. You don't want to over tighten them. The last thing you want to do is round off any of the heads on this. If you do, it's going to be very difficult to get that blade out again. So you're going to be stuck with that blade forever. So really careful not to round the heads off. So that's the blade installed on the rest. So the next part is going to be putting the rest onto the bow. With your arrow rest you'll get a mounting bolt. Bolt goes through the rest and screws into the arrow rest mounting holes, or the burger holes, whatever you prefer to call them. There's 2 holes on this model bow. Your bow may only have 1 hole. If it has 1, that's where the rest's got to go. If it's got 2 holes, I prefer to install it on the rear of the 2. And I'll show you why in a minute. So just screw that in, get an Allen key, and we'll tighten that up. So when you're attaching the rest of the bow, you want to try and make sure that it's nice and level on the bow. So get it so it's sitting nice and level, and tighten that down. You can tighten this quite hard. Again, don't round the head off or the rest on the bow forever, but you don't want it too loose, because the last thing you want is for that to come off, and trust me, I've done that before. So there you go. Our rest is now bolted onto the bow in the rear hole. Now, say I choose the rear hole mainly for the reason that it gets the tip of the prongs in line with the rear of the arrow shelf on the bow. That's just where I like to start off with it. I'm probably going to do some torque tuning later on in my tuning process, and that's going to involve moving the rest backwards and forwards on the bow. Starting off in that nice midpoint, it's not going to unduly influence the tune, so it's going to be easy for me to start that torque tuning process. So that's where I put it. Next, we are going to set the angle of the blade on the rest. So that will be the angle that the blade sits at in relation to the arrow rest shelf. Now, in order to get optimum clearance, you are best setting that angle somewhere between 37 and 40 degrees. It's difficult to measure it. You could try using a protractor, you can try cutting out circles of paper. If it works for you, that's great. I've found over the years it's just easier to eyeball it. It's not an exact science. It doesn't have to be at 37 degrees or it won't work. It can be anywhere between 37 and 40 degrees. It's only a rough measurement. So eyeballing, it's nice and easy, and it's close enough for what we're doing. So in order to change the angle of the launcher, there are 2 bolts on the back of this rest. Some rests, they're going to have different fixing methods. Some will have 2 bolts, some will have 1 bolt, some will be a side bolt. Get the instructions for the rest that you've got, because it's going to be very specific how you set that angle. Now, some rests do not have the option of adjusting the launcher angle. They're normally fixed at the optimum position for that rest to be in. Now, I say normally, they're not always fixed in that position. So if you find that your rest does not have an adjustable launcher angle and the blade is sitting very steep or very, very shallow, you may need to actually use the bolt on the side of the bow and angle the rest up or down in order to achieve the blade angle that you want, so that 37 to 40 degree angle. But on this one, it's going to be nice and easy. We're going to loosen those 2 screws. And now they're loose, you're able to move that arm up and down. So we're going to set that so the angle looks about 37 to 40 degrees. When you've been doing this as long as I have, you kind of get an idea of what looks right and what doesn't. But I'll show you where I've set this one. Tighten those back down again. Again, don't over tighten anything. These screws can be quite easy to snap, so you don't want to be doing that. So you see, tighten those back down again, and then you see the arrow shelf. I'll stand out of the way so you get a nice neutral background, and then the angle that that blade is sat at is probably around about 40 degrees. I've not got a protractor with me, so I can't measure that, but that's where you're going to want to see it. Now, the reason you want to set them at that angle is if they are too shallow, the arrow is not being supported properly by the prongs of the rest. So as you draw up, the arrow is more likely to fall off the rest. I mean, that's irritating to say the least, especially if you're a little bit nervous, a little bit shaky in a tournament. That's going to happen a lot, and that really isn't helpful. So in order to stop that happening, you want the angle of the launcher steep enough so the arrow is supported properly in the prongs. Now, if we go too steep, then we are going to be basically shooting the arrow almost at the face of the blade. So you're going to be getting a lot of contact between the vanes and the prongs of the arrow. And when you get contact, it's not necessarily consistent. So that arrow could be getting kicked off. You're going to get bad tuning results. So when you go to the paper frame later to tune the bow, you might be getting a consistent tear you can't get rid of. If you are, that's quite possibly contact. So you need to check the blade for any residue for your vanes, just to see if there is any. You can spray the arrow down with a foot pad or a deodorant, something like that, just to have a little look, see if you're getting any contact on those vanes. But in order to remove the risk of getting that contact, if you keep the blade angle somewhere between 37 and 40 degrees, it's going to be optimal. So that's why we set it where we do. Right. So the next bit will be to set the arrow rest height. So that's going to dictate where the arrow sat in the bow. Now, for tuning most modern bows, you're going to want to start off with the arrow sitting at 90 degrees to the string. That way you can be sure the arrow is coming out nice and straight. It's not too tail high, it's not tail low. It's going to ensure optimum clearance through the bow, and it's going to give you a nice starting point for paper tuning and other tuning methods as well. So in order to do that, easiest way to set the arrow rest height is to eyeball it, and that's what I do. So put the arrow on the bow, sit it on the rest, and then just have a look at where that arrow is sitting. You may need to support the weight of the arrow a little bit, as they can make the arrow rest flex slightly. Obviously don't lift it off the rest, otherwise you're not going to be setting it properly at all. So have a look at that. That looks about 90 degrees to the string. I say it's only rough to start with. It doesn't have to be exact, because you're going to fine tune the arrow rest position when you go through your tuning process. Another quick way of setting the arrow rest height is to use a bow square. If you clip the bow square on the bow and then move it down till it's just touching the tip of the prongs, and then have a look at the height on your knot point. That says sitting at 2 millimeters high for me. So that's a pretty good starting point for an outdoor arrow. They're quite thin. A portion of the arrow does sit inside the blades, inside the prongs of the blades. So I know 2 millimeters high on a bow square is going to be more or less 90 degrees to the string for a thin arrow. If you've got a thicker arrow like that, obviously it's going to be more like 3.5, 4 millimeters. If you do this a few times, you're going to get a good idea of what a good measurement should be using a bow square in relation to the launcher blade height. But as I say, it only needs to be rough right now to start with. So now that height's set, we need to set the left and right setting of the arrow rest. So that's basically where the arrow is sitting in the bow. It needs to be sitting, ideally you want the arrow to start off sitting dead through the middle of the bow. So the power of the string is completely behind the point of the arrow. You don't want the arrow pointing to the left or to the right. It's going to make things very difficult when it comes to tuning. So you really, if you start off with it nice and straight in the bow, you're going to find your tuning process is a lot simpler. So to do this, knock an arrow, sit it on the rest. Now, easiest way of doing this is to eyeball it, to check down the back of the bow. So if you sit the arrow on the rest and then look down the back of the bow, you want to try and line the string up through the centre of the riser, through the middle of the grip try and find the center line of your bow. It's not always going to be through the center of the grip. Different model bows have different grip centers, so you really have to try and look at the riser as a whole and find that center line. And when you do, run the string through the center line of the riser and make sure that the arrow is sat completely behind the string. You don't want to see the arrow pointing to the left or right of the string. So with this, it's pointing a little bit to the right, so towards the riser. So I'm going to want to move that out to the left. So to do that, we're going to get an Allen key and I'm going to loosen the bolt at the back. Different rests have got different mechanisms for moving them. This is just a simple bolt and slide rest. There's no micro adjust on this. You just undo the fixing bolt, slide the rest to where you want it to be, then tighten the bolt back down again. Some rests have micro adjust, so you can loosen them off and then you can really fine tune the setting of the rest using an Allen key. They're all good. Sometimes the micro adjust can be it's too fine, you don't need that finer movement. So just a simple rest like this, it's going to suit most people fine. So I'm just going to move that arrow out to the left slightly. Tighten that back down again. So as you can see, the left and right movement on the rest, the adjustments, they're exactly the same for up and down. So if you need to move the height of the rest, again, it's just a bolt at the side, slide the rest up or down, tighten it back up again. Make sure it's nice and snug, don't over tighten it. So now I'm just going to double check that this arrow is sitting pretty straight in the bow, and I think it is. Now, another quick way of setting the center shot on an arrow rest is to use a ruler or another measuring device. Some manufacturers will give you a center shot measurement, so it will be the distance between the inside edge of the riser, this bit, and the center of the arrow shaft when it's sat on the rest. 13/16 of an inch is a pretty common measurement in the archery industry. Some manufacturers it's a little more, a little less, some do it in mil. If the bow manufacturer has a center shot measurement, then you can start off by setting the arrow rest in that position, because that's going to be a really good place to start your tuning from. So to do that, I've got my micrometer here. Now I know from experience with this bow that my center shot measurement is normally about 21.5 millimeters, between 21.5 and 22 millimeters. So I'm going to set that to 21.5 millimeters, and I'm going to measure from the side of the bow to the center of the arrow, and hopefully you can see that the measure is straight through the middle of that arrow shaft. So that's about 21 millimeters. So I know that center shot measurement I did by eye is pretty much exactly what I've found it should be when I measure it. So now I've got the arrow rest height set. I know the arrow is 90 degrees to the string. I also know the arrow is sitting square in the bow, it's not pointing to the left or to the right. I've got the correct width launcher for the type of arrow I'm going to be using, and I've also got the correct stiffness blade on there to support the weight of this arrow. So now I'm set up. You can start your tuning process, so go into your paper tuning, French tuning, whatever the tuning methods you have. I must admit, I have sometimes seen a good portion of the season out by doing no more than just setting up the arrow rest like this, so I know it's square in the bow. Sort of time constraints, weather constraints, things like that. Sometimes you do end up just having to go with a good basic setup on the bow and trust that the arrow is coming out straight. And 9 times out of 10, even when I've gone through my tuning process, it's come up pretty good with the arrow rest in this position. So this is what I call a good neutral position for the arrow rest to be in, and it's where you want to start off. So I hope you've enjoyed watching it and learned something.